In July and August of 2019, I made a trip home to Australia for my nephew's wedding. It was also a great opportunity to spend a week with my two brothers in the idyllic town of Arley Beach in the Whitsunday Passage of Queensland. The trip was almost a month and went from Sydney to Brisbane to Arley Beach, then back to Sydney, off to Darwin for a week, and finally down to Perth for 4 days and home from there. Here's a map of Australia showing just how much green and inhabitable area there is and how much dry and arid there is. After what seemed like forever, it was only about 28 hours, I eventually made it to Arley Beach and hooked up with the family. I'll try to keep the family pics to a selected minimum. There's my brother Noel and the screeching cockatoo, or is it the other way around? Anyway, there's the bride in the centre and the two bridesmaids. Next morning, I was awoken by these two buggers. Well, I was awake at 4 a.m. anyway, so I went for a stroll along the boardwalk and the marina. Here's the collection of marina and boardwalk pictures. It really was a beautiful place. Later in the afternoon, we all went on the booze cruise out on the bay, and everyone was feeling right good. I won't try to name everyone, as family will know who they are, and anyone else probably doesn't give a rat's ass anyway.
Where's Dad? Dad's up the front. He's going.
Oh, yeah.
This picture of the three famous boys, myself, Noel, and David, at the end
Can
here.
I have that seat there? Of course you can. All right.
On Friday, we relaxed on the beach and the marina and walked along the seaside and boardwalk. Day after the wedding, of which I have no pictures as the photographer jealously guarded the access, we took a one-day cruise to Whitsunday Island and Whitehaven Beach, the whitest beach in the world with a composition of 98% pure silica sand. We had a picnic on the beach, a few drinks, and Wendy even managed to stand up on a surfboard. We finished the day with a snorkel trip to the nearby reefs, but the conditions of the coral was terrible due to the bleaching caused by water temperatures increasing, and was very disappointing. Then we flew back to Sydney and drove on to the Ulladulla, arriving quite late at night. The next few days were spent relaxing in Ulladulla, at Noel and Wendy's place. The coastline there is equally beautiful, with one beautiful bay and beach after another. We found a real pie shop with about 50 different types of pies. Yummy. Then I saw a men's shed, and we stopped and asked for a tour. I had given a speech at Toastmasters previously about the men's shed movement, started in Australia and now supported by the government because of the great benefits it is creating for the health and mental well-being of older men. They worked on woodworking, propagating plants, fixing stuff, at the same time having some support group to work alongside. It was very interesting. Friday we drove to Sydney and stayed overnight to get an early start. We Ubered into the city centre, wandered around the bridge and the Opera House, which was incredible that night, and began walking to the Chinese district, which Noel assured me was just around the bend. After an hour's slogging and getting no closer, we Ubered the rest of the way and had a great Chinese dinner. So, Sydney has a vibrant Chinese community in the area where we visited. Saturday we flew to Darwin, and after a quick tour of the gardens overlooking the harbour and the Parliament House, we returned and settled into the hotel at the airport. On Sunday we headed into Kakadu National Park. All during the drive there was a constant evidence of the native burning practices, with different areas shown, more or recent fires. This is how they manage bushfires on their land, not like the inhabitants of Victoria and New South Wales. They have a lot to teach us about taking care of the land. Stopping at the windows to the wetland on the way, but most of the wetlands was dry. The visitor centre was managed by the tribal folk, and we spoke to one young lady. The wetlands were experiencing a rare dry period during our visit. We then drove on to Kakadu, stopping at the cathedrals of the North Termite Mounds. These termite mounds are built by thousands of termites. Then we checked into the Mercure Crocodile Hotel. We drove a bit further into the park to Ubeer Rock Art and a river crossing where the crocodiles feed. The river was running into the ocean, but in about half an hour the flow would reverse as the high tide came up the river carrying fish for the crocs. So we visited the Ubeer Rock Art. Some of these paintings are believed to be over 3,000 years old. There were two art types, the ancient type explained here and shown in these paintings, and the more established X-ray art on the remaining paintings. Note the drawing of a Tasmanian tiger, explained here, that dates it at about 2,000 years old. Then we climbed to the top of Ubeer Rock, and there was a magnificent panorama surrounding it. By the time we returned to the river flow had reversed. The tide was coming in and the crocs were feeding.
Go down through. The bait there a minute ago, it already over the river. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay.
We returned to the Crocodile Mercure Hotel for the night and got ready to head out for the Yellow River cruise the next morning. About a third of Australia's bird species are represented in Kakadu, with at least 60 species found in the wetlands. The jabiru, or black-necked stork, is Australia's largest wading bird and our only stork. It stands 1.3 to 1.5 metres in height, and its wingspan is 2.5 metres from tip to tip. The head colours an amazing glossy, shimmery black with blue, green and purple. There's also plenty of crocodiles in their natural habitat and buffalo on the floodplains. We then drove back to Darwin and found what's probably the best fish and chip shop in Australia, at least in the Northern Territory. Tuesday was spent shopping and exploring Darwin by foot.
Mr Deputy Speaker, we are continuing to invest in our Contact, STARS and RMLA academies. These programs operate throughout our Northern Territory schools and also add extra support for young people engaged in extracurricular opportunities to grow their strengths, skills and capacities to be positive social community contributors.
On Wednesday, we drove to Litchfield National Park and visited the magnetic termite mounds, so aligned to control heat in the mounds. We then went on to Florence Falls. A sign posted Florence Falls mentions 2 walks for hiking, the Shady Creek Walk of 1.2 kilometres and the Florence Creek Walk, which is 3.2 kilometres or 2 miles. We climbed down the stairs. The Florence Falls plunge pool was a great refreshing swim spot. There was not a lot of water in the falls. Again, it was the drier season for some time. Then we proceeded to Bewley Waterholes, a series of basins in the rock riverbed above the falls. They were treacherously slippery, but great to just sit and relax and cool off in. Then we drove on to Wangi Falls, but it was closed due to crocodile spotting. I continued to be amazed by the 4 tandem trucks using the highways. You really need to make sure you have passing room before you begin to pass one of these. Thursday was a day of shopping, culminating in a visit to the Mindle Beach sunset markets. I was most entranced by the patterns in the sand generated by some small crab who deposited his diggings in a system, producing some amazing designs. Mindle Beach sunset markets are a seasonal market which is held at Mindle Beach. They originally started in the Darwin Mall in 1987 and the shopkeepers complained, so they moved it to the beach. The Mindle markets today consist of 60 food and 130 craft stalls. There was everything from crocodile skulls to snake handlers, whip crackers, you name it, it was there. The HMAS Coonawarra celebrated Northern Territory Navy Week there by hosting a series of community events. We were fortunate to be present for the Sunset Tribute on Mindle Beach. The Darwin community turned out in droves to watch more than 100 officers and sailors from the HMAS Coonawarra perform ceremonial divisions and the sunset ceremony. The next day I flew out to Perth to visit famous Australian author Stephen King, whose 3rd book I had just completed narrating. We drove around Perth, visited Elizabeth Quay and the Bell Tower. The Bell Tower contains the Anzac Bell, commemorating the centenary of Anzac, 2014 to 2018, marking 100 years since Australia's involvement in the First World War. Weighing in at 6.5 tonnes, the bell is the heaviest of its kind ever to be cast in Australia and was installed in the Bell Tower and its first public ringing on Remembrance Day, November the 11th, 2018. We had a great lunch and then went up to see Lake Munga, one of the lake which features in Steve's first book on the series called Glimpse, Memoir of a Serial Killer. We returned to Steve's home and spent the evening. I was a bit under the weather and was glad to crash. The next day, we drove south and did the remaining Glimpses reality tour, passing all the beautiful sandy beaches to Yalinga, the inspiration for Steve's second murder mystery, where the murderer hides the bodies of the young women he murders in a cave. Steve did a bit of checking out any future hiding places. Then we went on to Bustleton Jetty, which also features in Book 2, The Beautiful Deaths. Bustleton Jetty is the longest wooden plied jetty in the Southern Hemisphere. At the end of the jetty is an underwater observatory. We drove on to Cottesloe, and I dipped the foot in the Indian Ocean. Then I saw an example of why Steve's murder mysteries involved beautiful young women. We then had a lovely dinner with a group of Steve's friends who had listened to the audiobooks, and we shared a great dinner and social evening, except when the waiter dropped the jug of beer on Steve's lap. Look for the next book, entitled The Killer Waiter, which dumps radioactive isotopes of beer into the lap of victims. On the last day, we explored more of Perth and saw the submarine HMAS Owens. Steve dropped me off at a restaurant just prior to my flight out, and I spent the evening reminiscing with Jan's younger brother, Johnny. Then I climbed into my cabin for the 30-hour flight from hell to Sydney, LA, Atlanta, and Roanoke. The trip was over.